Chapter 2. The Age of Ash and Ambition. The Silence After the Storm. For 100 years, the name Akkad stood alone in the world's memory. Sargon and his descendants achieved the impossible. They bound the bickering cities of Mesopotamia into a single, breathing empire. But around 2150 BCE, the great kingdom shattered. Imagine the psychological shock. For generations, the king of Akkad was a living god, king of the four quarters of the world. Then, suddenly, Agada was burned by invading Guchian tribes. Archaeologists cannot find its location to this day. The world order was gone. Trade routes to India and Egypt fell silent. Irrigation canals choked with silt. There was no central power to organize laborers. A Sumerian scribe wrote, "Who was king? Who was not king?" With Akkad extinguished, Mesopotamia plunged into a 400-year power vacuum. It was a return to extreme localism. Every city, Ur and Isin, Larsa and Mari became its own fortress. The world became a much more dangerous place for merchants. In Sargon's days, a seal protected you. Now, moving grain 50 miles meant paying taxes to 3 warlords. The economy regressed. Without standardized silver, many regions slid back into bartering. People stayed closer to home. Great ziggurats, once symbols of imperial pride, now served as lookout towers for approaching enemy raiding parties. There was one final attempt to bring back the old ways before Babylon. Around 2100 BCE, the city of Ur rose up. This period, the Ur III Renaissance, was the last gasp of original Sumerian culture. Kings tried to be bureaucrats, obsessed with order. They created the most detailed record-keeping system. Thousands of clay tablets recording every goat, grain, and beer. They built a great ziggurat of Ur, which still stands today. A defiant statement that Sumerian civilization was back, but it was a hollow victory. The climate was changing. A 300-year drought dried up northern fields. Rivers shifted paths, leaving once great cities stranded in the sand. Ur III collapsed under paperwork and migrating tribes. By 1800 BCE, Mesopotamia was a land of ghosts and ruins. Old Sumerian language was dying out. It was replaced by Akkadian dialects. Holy cities were exhausted from centuries of border wars over land and water. In this exhausted landscape, a small, unknown town began to fortify its walls. It wasn't a coastal or mountain fortress. It was a town at a strategic crossroads on the Euphrates. His name was Babylon, the Gate of the Gods. The power vacuum would be filled not by a warrior, but by a legal mind building a system to outlast his own life. The age of the warlord was ending. The age of Babylon was beginning. We moved from a world of chaos into the first true era of rule of law. This segment explores how Hammurabi used a 7-foot-tall block of black diorite to create a permanent, predictable society. By 1754 BCE, Hammurabi had united the warring factions of Mesopotamia. Conquest was the easy part. Holding an empire together required more than spears. It required a shared sense of reality. If a merchant in Babylon and a farmer in Larsa didn't follow the same rules, the economy would collapse. To prevent this, Hammurabi commissioned one of the most famous monuments in human history, the Stele of the Code of Hammurabi. Imagine standing in a public square and seeing a massive, 7-foot-tall pillar of polished black stone. At the top, a relief carving shows Hammurabi receiving symbols of justice from Shamash, the god of the sun and justice. The message was clear. These weren't just the king's ideas. They were divine truths. The code consists of 282 laws, carved in beautiful cuneiform script. It is most famous for lex talionis, or an eye for an eye. Today, we think of this as harsh, but in 1750 BCE, it was actually a form of progress. Before this code, if a powerful man harmed a poor farmer, the farmer had almost no recourse. Violence would lead to blood feuds that lasted generations. Hammurabi's laws replaced private revenge with state-regulated justice. If you break a man's bone, the state breaks yours. It was predictable. It was fair in a way the world hadn't seen. However, the code wasn't equal. It was the first document to explicitly bake social class into the law. The penalties were much lighter if you harmed a slave than if you harmed a free man. Yet, for the first time in history, The law was public. A judge couldn't just change the rules on a whim, because the rules were literally set in stone for everyone to see. Beyond the violent eye for an eye laws, the code was actually a sophisticated economic manual. It dealt with things we still struggle with today: minimum wage, liability, and consumer protection. If a builder constructed a house so poorly that it collapsed and killed the owner, the builder would be put to death. If it killed the owner's son, the builder's son was executed. This created a skin-in-the-game philosophy that forced a high standard of craftsmanship across the empire. Even more surprising were the laws protecting the vulnerable. Hammurabi famously claimed his goal was to prevent the strong from oppressing the weak. The code established early forms of alimony for divorced women and set a fixed minimum wage for laborers. It even had debt relief clauses. If a storm wiped out a farmer's crop, his interest payments were legally canceled. Hammurabi's code was the world's first user manual for civilization. It transformed Mesopotamia from a land of warring tribes into a society of citizens. While the Akkadian Empire relied on Sargon's arm, the Babylonian Empire relied on the permanence of Hammurabi's words. This pillar of stone proved that a leader's greatest weapon wasn't his sword, but his ability to provide order. Babylon became the intellectual capital of the world, not because it had the most gold, but because it had the most stable system. But as we will see, a system is only as strong as the people who can defend it. And a new shadow was growing in the north: the iron-willed Assyrians, the architects of time. Hammurabi's laws brought order to human behavior, but Babylonian scholars were after something much bigger. They wanted to bring order to the universe. To do this, they didn't use stone pillars. They used clay tablets and a revolutionary way of thinking about numbers. Today, we use a base 10 metric system, likely because we have 10 fingers. But the Babylonians inherited and perfected a base 60 system, also known as the sexagesimal system, from the Sumerians. Why 60? It's a mathematical marvel because it's incredibly versatile, being perfectly divisible by 12 different factors, from 1 and 2 all the way up to 30. In an ancient world without calculators or decimal points, this made dealing with fractions incredibly easy. If a merchant needed to divide a sack of grain 3 ways, or 4 ways, or 5 ways, the base 60 system handled it flawlessly. This system was so perfectly designed that it never really died. In fact, you use it every single day. When the Babylonians looked at a circle, they applied their mathematical base to it, dividing it into 360 degrees, which is 60 multiplied by 6. But they didn't stop at geometry. They applied this exact same logic to time. They divided the day into 24 hours, the hour into 60 minutes, and the minute into 60 seconds. Every time you check your watch to see if you're running late, or look at a compass to find your direction, you are using the exact mathematical framework invented by Babylonian priests over 3,000 years ago. Armed with this powerful mathematics, the Babylonians turned their eyes to the sky. They weren't just stargazing for fun. To them, the movements of the planets were messages from the gods. If they could predict the sky, they could predict the future. They built the towering ziggurats, not just as temples, but as ancient observatories. Night after night, year after year, scribes recorded the movements of Venus, Jupiter, and the moon. Through centuries of meticulous record-keeping, they made a world-shattering discovery. The heavens weren't chaotic. The stars and planets moved in predictable, mathematical cycles. They successfully calculated the paths of the planets and could even predict solar and lunar eclipses with stunning accuracy. They transitioned humanity from superstition to the beginnings of true empirical science. This mastery of the stars had a very practical earthly application: farming. To ensure the empire didn't starve, they needed a perfect calendar to track the flooding of the rivers and the planting seasons. Using their astronomical data, the Babylonians perfected the 12-month lunar calendar. Since 12 lunar cycles are roughly 354 days, a bit short of a full solar year, the seasons would slowly drift out of sync. To fix this, Babylonian astronomers mathematically calculated exactly when to insert a leap month to realign their calendar with the sun. This 12-month framework is the direct ancestor of the calendar hanging on your wall right now. The old Babylonian period was a true golden age. They mapped human justice with Hammurabi's code, and they mapped the universe with base 60 math. But in the ancient world, wealth and wisdom were a dangerous combination. The shining gates of Babylon had caught the attention of outsiders. The age of scholars was about to end, and the age of iron and chariots was about to begin. Thank you for watching. Next video, the Chariot Age and the sudden sack of Babylon soon.